So I'm just going to make a video where I talk about a really annoying thing I've been having to deal with for the past less than a week, but it might as well have been a week with how long I've been having to deal with this. So I will sometimes just get in my mind some absurd project that I probably don't need to work on, but I'll just do it anyway because it's like, yeah, this will probably help in the long term because I'm all about trying to optimize things for the most part. And this I saw as being a big optimization for really everything that I do, because what it was going to be was me converting my old computer into a proper file server, because it already was kind of one, but the problem is that it was still using Windows, and I actually kept it like that deliberately. When I upgraded to my new computer, I wanted to have the fallback possible to the old machine, so same exact files, same exact everything, just nothing changed really, just in case. I've had this new computer for a long enough time now where it's odd saying a new computer because it's, well, just the computer I've had since the beginning of this year. So I finally decided that now was going to be the time where I finally said goodbye to Windows, other than my VM of Windows. But having Windows on bare metal hardware, I was going to say goodbye to that, and holy shit, this was a project that just became a right pain in the fucking ass. Because I wanted to do this properly, I wanted to do this in a way where just in case anything went wrong, I could always revert it like that. So what I'm talking about is this whole thing started off with me first imaging the NVMe stick that I have in that computer. That is my C drive. Because I wanted to have a perfect image of all my files on there. Because I was going to install a new operating system on a new bootloader, all of that. And good thing I did that because I am pretty sure I corrupted the Windows installation on that. I made a backup of everything on there. I then also made another backup of my user profile. I then just saved all of this. I also did individual backups of like the specific boot partition and recovery partition. These are like partitions that Microsoft just has on the hard drive. That way, if I fucked up one of those and didn't like screw up anything else with the whole partitioning of the system, I could just load those back onto the partitions. That's at least what my theory was. Does it work? I don't know, because I haven't had to try it out yet, because I'm actually pretty satisfied with how it came out. Because, yeah, even though it took 25 hours to just image a 2 terabyte solid state drive, because I was writing it to an external drive at the same time, that was the only way I could really do it. I wasn't going to write onto one of the local drives. Hell, I had those detached because I wasn't going to risk any fucking chances where I type in something wrong and uh-oh, I have just wiped out an 8 terabyte hard drive of mine. So speaking of, I'm also at the moment trying to not just buy new hard drives. I'm wanting to consolidate things, compress things, also just get things in order. That way I can properly fill up the hard drives on this computer and then be like, all right, now I can justify the next hard drive that I put in there. Because currently this computer only has 4 SATA slots on it, and I'm using 3 of them right now. One of them I have open, or I had open for a DVD drive, but I'm not even really using that anymore, and even when I do things with a DVD, I actually just like ghetto rig it into my new computer where I just have one of the doors open, have a SATA cable coming out of it into the, yeah, just picture that. Yeah, that's actually something I did with the Windows 98 emulation video. I think I showed some footage of that, maybe, I don't remember. Point is, I'm moving on up in the world, we're moving forward in time, nothing's coming on DVDs anymore. At this point, having a DVD drive in a computer is kind of pointless because it's really only useful for, I don't know, you want to install Half-Life off the original CD, be my guest. I'm getting sidetracked because once I got the Arch installation installed, this actually was really big pain in the ass, surprisingly. Because the problem is my motherboard wasn't recognizing the boot partition. It was only recognizing the Windows boot partition. And the Windows boot manager, I don't know how to modify it or how to, if it can even be modified, to recognize Linux. So I realized at that point, because I kept both. I kept the boot partition, and I also kept the actual Windows partition just shrunk down to about 900 gigabytes, just in case, because I thought, hey, let me have the option of dual booting. Why not? Just in case I wanted that, because maybe I need something specific off of that computer. No. Not at all, because I ended up having to destroy that boot partition, and then even when I did that, turns out the motherboard still wasn't reading the boot partition. It wasn't finding it. And I'm like, okay, what the fuck is going on now? I had to actually install the Grub bootloader in a really odd way. All I had to do was add a flag for, I think it was like portable or something, or removable was the flag, where I guess this is if you were installing the bootloader onto a USB drive, if I had to guess based on the context of it. Which means that my computer is kind of reading the bootloader of a solid-state NVMe stick as a flash drive, kind of, but it fucking works because the computer, I've been using it pretty much non-stop ever since that happened. Really fucking odd. I'll just put it like that. The computer, though, if you remember from the whole chronicles I've had of this computer, it had a broken HDMI port on the motherboard. It kind of worked when you maybe could wrestle with it a bit, but generally speaking, the thing was broken because I was getting, like, no HDMI signal, like, actually corrupted HDMI signal on my monitor because of this fucking HDMI port that was just jacked up. What I did was, this was kind of the death of the HDMI port on that computer, because once I got Arch installed onto there, and by the way, I also went into, when I was trying to get the like boot partition to work, I was actually loading into Manjaro, you know, with like an actual GUI. Yeah, the HDMI at that point was dying. It just, like, you would get one, it would almost be like if you turn on a car and then you turn it off and the battery's just dead. So you have to then kickstart it, but by turning off and on the computer again. That's effectively how this HDMI thing worked, because as soon as like the monitor would turn off, well, there goes the signal. It's never coming back again for some reason. I don't know why, but that's just how it was. At this point, I get the thing working, and I load into the actual installation on the hard drive. I very quickly set up OpenSSH. I very quickly set up networking, plug the thing into a router, and call it there. Like, okay, we're done here. All I need to ever do with this computer to get it to work is turn it on, decrypt the hard drive by putting in a password, and that's it. Because I can log into it right now. So at that point, it's kind of like, well, mission accomplished, right? That my file server is exactly that. It is only a file server. Well, the added benefit to this is I now have a computer that minus a GPU is still actually a pretty decent computer. Because it still has the 8 cores, the 4 cores with like the hyperthreading and all that. It still has that I used when making Absolute Problem. It still has the 64 gigabytes of RAM that I had in there when making Absolute Problem. It still has all the hard drives and the same exact files on there, though I had to go through and like remap the hard drives in a way that made sense, because I mean, SDA doesn't really line up with like the drive lettering that I had beforehand, so I had to go and figure that out. But once you do that, it's pretty much the same computer and is able to be used exactly the same way as how I've been using it for the past couple months. But there started to become a problem, because what ended up happening was I have this program on all my machines called NCDU. What this does is it makes a visual like map of your file system, so you know how big the files are, how big directories are, all of that. It's kind of like Windows directory stats on Windows with that program, except a lot better and not actually having that like visualization. But it does just give you numbers, and that is exactly what I kind of want. The problem I am facing now with this computer is me actually indexing everything in my computer just to see how big the files are, where the files are, all of that. Well, I have about 20 terabytes of data on the computer. And the problem is, I also have about 700 to 800,000 files on the computer. And here's the thing. If you don't know about this, I'll explain it real quick. Why that's a problem is, well, inherently it's not entirely a problem until you actually look at what those files are. So, why this becomes a problem is if you have a bunch of tiny-ass little files, then it will actually, at some point, it'll actually be slower to move those files than it is to move one file that is actually the same size as those files. So I don't know the exact number, but so don't quote me on this, but the point I'm making is you could have 10,000 1 kilobyte files, and it will actually take longer to move those files than having, what would that be, about 100 megabyte file, a single 100 megabyte file. That will be transferred faster than the other files, and the reason for that is because the computer has to, with like the CPU and RAM, has to deal with each of those individual files appropriately. Because of that, you end up doing more work for like grains of sand as opposed to just packing them together into one bag and then moving it. Picture having one guy going and picking up a bag of dirt as opposed to having 10,000 men go to each little bit of dirt, pick it up, and put it onto the back of a truck. I had not done any file compression really on my computers, because I just didn't really think about it. I didn't think it was important to do. I was like, well, it's extracted. If I need to, I might go and compress them, but I may need these files, you know? Huge fucking mistake. Because I was actually going back to, there was a point in all of this, because this is where the headache actually starts. I started going through a directory map after it took like 20 minutes to process. I started going through that and looking at what were the biggest files, the biggest folders that had the most amount of files that I could then compress down into one. And at the same time, I also was, because I have a program that lets me actually use like SSH file system, I was actually pointing WinDirStat at the hard drives and just seeing it map out the hard drives very slowly to then go from there and figure out where are the most files, how do I compress all of them into one. Because at this point, the problem wasn't necessarily just compressing the files to save space. The problem was now, how do I get 10,000 files into one? And the biggest culprits of this, no joke, were actually games. And as well, Minecraft in particular. And the reason for this is because when you consider, say, because like one of the things I had to compress was actually a Resonant Rise installation. So if you are familiar with Minecraft mod packs, and this is part of why it takes so fucking long to like actually extract some of these mod packs, it's because you have not just the like 150 mods, the jar files that are going to be in the mods folder. You also have all of those configs. You also have every sound that ends up generating in that directory, and any other little thing that gets generated, where all of these files are tiny. They are kilobytes, but because the game ends up having to generate all these over time, you end up with some big problems. And this is especially more apparent because I guess I'm in the more unique situation where I had Minecraft Alpha worlds I was having to compress. The Minecraft Alpha save format predated the MC region format, which predated the current Anvil format. So what that means is a little bit of history. The original save format, the Alpha level save format, was really shit because it generated fucking thousands of files. It generated maybe hundreds of them when you would immediately spawn into the world, but as you played the game, you would end up with thousands. So what ended up happening, to my understanding, is someone actually saw this, thought, okay, this is really stupid. I'm going to make a mod that makes this more efficient. And this is even before Forge. This was like a jar mod where you had to go in, add some files, and it would calculate things differently. It actually made logical save files for the fucking game. Notch saw it, said, cool, can I use this? Yeah. Awesome. So that's how we ended up with MC Region. And then eventually, I guess it got optimized some more with Anvil, and we've stayed on Anvil ever since. But yeah, the original Minecraft Alpha world size would be, I don't know, like you would have, like, I had maps that were maybe 14 megabytes that had thousands of files. And you see the problem there, where all of a sudden, the computer now has to take extra time to process those thousands of files when you want to move them anywhere. So these are really unique things that are to, I guess, my situation, but there's probably other things like this that you may even have on your computer. So I want to say this on this video as more of a lesson for anyone to take away from this, where it's pretty important, if you care about it enough, to actually go through your computer and try to compress things together. Because not only, really, it's all about file archiving, where I stress this on this channel somewhat regularly, where I am obsessive when it comes to file archiving. What you should do is, not even in the case of, because I haven't even talked about how I've been able to compress like video game footage and actually get a lot of space off of it. Getting files together and putting them into one other file, basically making it a container that holds everything else, that the computer can then treat as one file, that and it can later then process that to extract into however many files you then need out of it. Doing that is really fucking important because it makes your computer run better, because it doesn't have to process all this extra bullshit, especially if you're moving files. Ever wondered why if you download a fuck ton of files off of like iCloud or off of like Google Drive, it zips the thing? Not only does it make downloading it much more manageable in your web browser, it's because that is just the thing that makes sense to do. Because if you have 10,000 files that you're downloading, well, fuck, Firefox is going to be struggling, because now you're actually distributing that workload. If you think about it, you're now distributing that workload onto Google's servers, but then also onto the network, and then also onto your computer, because you're having to take so many of these different files. Like someone's struggling to start their car outside. Now, I have one last thing that I wanted to talk about, and it's actually the thing I just said with being able to compress gameplay footage. So, as you can imagine, I have a fuck ton of gameplay footage, because I have been doing YouTube for a while. There are different projects I've recorded a fuck ton of footage for that have never seen the light of day. There are a lot of games that I have recorded that have seen the light of day. I don't know, like Needy Streamer Overdose, Omori, especially Omori. Quick thing I want to say about Omori, that's actually an instance where I had to decompress the footage because I was proxying it. What proxying in Premiere does is it optimizes the footage. It pre-processes the footage in a way that Premiere can just instantly read it and know it, like be able to just read directly off of it. Meanwhile, how I had originally filmed it is I actually had compressed it to about 10 megabits a second. Turns out that was really bad for Premiere because Premiere is now having to unload that like 10 megabits per second and decipher what was going on, like uncompress it to process it. This is just what I've had to make sense in my head, because it was a fucking nightmare finding this, because it's like, well, shit, I have 30 hours of footage that is running like ass in Premiere, and the reason why is because it was just really compressed. Anyway, point I'm making is that footage, once I had to proxy it, turned from a total of 150 gigabytes of footage to 800 for just the proxies. The Omori project file was, or the folder, I should say, the folder that had everything for the second Omori video was 1.1 terabytes. Insane is an understatement. So when I finally did get around to compressing the proxies, and this happened a while ago, but I was able to compress 800 gigabytes of like really shitty looking footage, because it wasn't even like 4K proxies. It was like 540p proxies. That's what makes it so utterly baffling. Doing that, I actually ended up with, I think, only 100 gigabytes of proxies after that, because it all compressed back down once I put it into like ultra compressed 7Z files. So I've had to do a similar thing for another project that I am working on, and also several other projects that I've worked on in the past, because I hadn't actually gone through and compressed them. And yeah, I've actually been able to free up like hundreds of gigabytes doing that. Now, it doesn't work for every bit of footage. You have to think about this intelligently. So Omori, as an example, there are a lot of pixels that can be compressed together because, well, it's a pixelated game, right? But the footage that I take on my camera that is like raw, uncompressed footage, at most, all I've been able to compress out of that is it goes from like, say, 10 gigabytes to 9.9 gigabytes. That is the best case scenario I've gotten out of that. So context matters for that, because you have to also think about just how it's doing compressing, especially if you're doing like lossless compression, where you're trying to lose no bit of data. If you just have a 10-minute video that is a red screen, even if it's like 8K footage, you can probably compress that down to like a megabyte, because it's just going to be like, all right, well, it's a single color in every single one of these pixels for, what would that be, 10 minutes? So 36,000 frames if it's at 60 FPS. We just have to say this and then do it this many times. All right, there you go. compression done. So that rant is over. This fucking file server, man, it is fucking wild. But the good news is I no longer have a file server that has like millions of files on it. Okay, hundreds of thousands of files on it. Now it has gone from about 750,000 to 336,000. So that's really good. I've basically cut it in half, and that's like, here's the thing. One of those hard drives, it just has a bunch of scattered files on it, but because it was an old hard drive. One last thing. I was going really deep into my hard drives where I was actually compressing stuff that was on my previous file server, which, if you can sense the pattern here, that means that I had to go back to my computer 2 computers ago and start compressing stuff because I had fucking files. I think I had like a Resonant Rise server I was running off of that at some point. That might have been this one. Yeah, this one with Mark that I briefly talked about in my Minecraft video. Yeah, shit from like 2017 was showing up in that compression. So luckily, I think I am done. Knock on wood. I don't have to worry about this that much. And it's also really good that this is done because holy fucking shit, man. It has been hot as hell the past, like, week, 2 weeks. I mean, hottest fucking month, apparently. So, yeah, it's amazing having this going on as I also have 2 computers running in my room as my AC also isn't working. I have a fan just sitting in the window. So, yeah, that's been really fun. Anyway, subscribe to the channels. I'm out.